There are some people on the board and some members who have drafted a resolution to be presented in the House of Delegates here in a couple of weeks that basically removes all personhood characteristics from babies, from fetuses. They say, from a fetus, embryo, or fertilized egg, they should not be considered a person with the same rights and legal protections as born individuals.
You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nowlin.
And I'm Shawn Graham.
We lead Conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we are thankful you're listening to this show, specifically this show, an important show talking about some important issues related to life. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please don't hesitate to send us any questions or comments via email. You can reach me directly by emailing matthew@tnchristian.com.
Or Shawn, SHAWN, @tnchristian.com.
You can also find me on X. I'm at MNBookman. Today's show is sponsored in the West Tennessee area by the #1 lawn care company in the Mid-South, Herbie Systems. Spring is here, and without enough nutrients, your lawn becomes more susceptible to diseases and pests. To effectively keep weeds away from your lawn, trust the experts at Herbie Systems. Call 901-451-8214 today and let them kill your weeds. Our scripture for today is from Proverbs, the 16th chapter, verses 23 through 28. A wicked man taketh a gift out of the bosom to pervert the ways of judgment. Wisdom is before him that hath understanding, but the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her that bare him. Also, to punish the just is not good, nor to strike princes for equity. He that hath knowledge spareth his words, and a man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. Before we can honestly engage HB 533, which we've talked about for the last several weeks on the show, we have to talk about the words we're using. We shared years ago the postmodern idea from Michel Foucault that language isn't just a tool, it's a battleground. When you reshape the meaning of words and reshape the language, you grab power. So here we are. We toss around terms like life, heartbeat, fetus, personhood, and choice, and we just assume that people universally understand them, but they don't. In fact, I would say the majority of people don't. It's not even close. And if we are serious about the moral and the legal stakes up with HB 533, then we must be serious about the language that we use to discuss this and all life issues. We need a lexicon. We need a shared vocabulary. And just because we have that, it won't force agreement. What it will do is it will ensure clarity. What does life mean in the context of HB 533? Biological function, independent viability, legal personhood. Is a heartbeat simply the detection of electrical activity or the coordinated motion we instinctively associate with a beating heart? If we can't agree on what the words mean, we'll never agree on what the law should do. This isn't about semantics. It's about clarity, and it's about justice. If we're legislating when and how the state intervenes in the most intimate of human matters, the creation of life, then we must define our terms with care. Without a clear lexicon, policy becomes posturing, and citizens on both sides are left unheard and feeling misunderstood. HB 533 raised a lot of urgent questions, but we can't answer them until we know what we're saying. So let's begin not with a vote. It's too late for that until next January. Not with a protest. We can have those soon, but with a dictionary. Let's do the hard, necessary work of naming what we mean. The integrity and the future of law around this bill depends on it. Today's guest is a returning guest and a longtime friend of the show. Dr. Omar Hamada is a medical doctor, an entrepreneur, and an ordained minister. He holds degrees in biology and chemistry, business administration, and medicine. He served in the U.S. Army Special Ops as a flight surgeon, and because of his experience in family medicine and obstetrics and gynecology, Dr. Hamada has been seen on many news shows and interviews for his outspoken views against medical abortion. He is also the medical director of RX Genomics, which specializes in pharmacogenomics, or the power to tailor healthcare treatment to individuals. Dr. Hamada, welcome to Faith in Action.
Thanks, Matthew. I appreciate it.
And I've shared this story before, but I just remember the first time that I met you in person was actually at your house. And I went into your office there. You invited me up to your office. And it was the first time I'd been in a room, not just with one wall filled up with degrees and certifications and recognitions, two walls in a good sized room. You are an impressive man, and we're glad to call you a friend and glad to have you on the show.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I've just got to say, that wasn't my idea. I was out of town for a few days, and my mom and stepdad went up there and put all those things up. I was like, "What did you do?" And they're like, "You earned them. You deserve." I was like, "Whatever." So it's almost an embarrassment.
Like
No,
Moses.
that bio is pages long. It's so impressive. I love reading it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Well, you have been outspoken in your calls against the medical industry's support of abortion and disregard for life. How did you become such a strong voice in this national conversation?
You know, I used to say it was an accident, but it was really the Lord. I mean, I had nothing to do with it. I've always been pro-life, and I've always spoken out against this culture of death that we find ourselves in. But I was going through a really tough time in my life a few years ago and had lost everything. I mean, marriage, church, health, business, finances, etc., friends. And I was laying in bed post-op. I just had like my third surgery and just been discharged and was laying in bed. This was late January of 2019. And was watching Fox News in my apartment, and they were covering at the time Governor Mario Cuomo being so ecstatic at New York State Legislature's passage of what he termed the most aggressive abortion legislation in the history of the United States. And basically, they removed all obstacles to aborting a child, even up to the day of full term delivery at 40 weeks and beyond. And I wasn't big on Twitter, but I was Facebooking a lot and was, pretty prolific there. But decided to cross tweet. It was still when Twitter had, their limit on characters, and had to shorten my Facebook message, but basically tweeted out, I'm a board certified OBGYN. I've delivered so many thousand babies, and there's never a reason to abort a child. I was going to say second and third trimester, but it wouldn't. I had too many letters. So I said in the third trimester of pregnancy, abortion, no, delivery, yes. I mean, we can early deliver for certain maternal or fetal indications. And then I went to sleep, and it went viral. I woke up the next morning, and within 2 days, had about 10 million hits on Twitter and Facebook, and starting to get all sorts of threats and attacks and all that. And then in my Instagram messages, Fox News producer contacted me and said, "Hey, do you have a minute to talk? We'd love to have you on the show." And just took off from there. And within a week, I was in studio in New York, and then Huckabee and Laura, and all that. So I was taken from the pits of despair, and literally 2 days post-op, into thrust onto the literally international. Even Russia Times was calling. So it was the hand of the Lord, I think, that pushed me up there.
Sure. I remember that, and that was great. That was right before Tennessee's heartbeat bill became such a controversy, and we connected, I think, through some mutuals after that on the issue of life. Thank you for that. That puts you at odds with a lot of your colleagues. We were talking before the show, I think, about a resolution that, as you were talking about what happened in New York, I was thinking to myself, well, man, that sounds like the Tennessee Medical Association House of Delegates, like something we were talking about. What is happening in Tennessee behind closed doors?
I don't think anybody ever really believed the trigger law or heartbeat law would ever pass. We never thought that Roe v. Wade would be reversed.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it is. I mean, and it was Planned Parenthood's fault in Mississippi with Dobbs. I mean, the Mississippi State Legislature wanted to set a limit on 15 weeks. We'll abort up to 15 weeks, but nothing beyond that. And it wasn't good enough for them. And that's even more radical than liberal Europe, who sets it at like 12 weeks. I think Netherlands has 20 and all that, but most of Europe is like 12 to 14.
Yeah.
So it wasn't good enough for them. So it ended up in the Supreme Court. And what happened? You know what happened.
Praise the Lord.
So, yeah, exactly. So the trigger law was instituted, and then we had to go back and reformat some of the language to actually make it a bit more accurate. But ever since, the left and the abortionists have been doing everything they can to find a way back in, to aborting babies in the state. The Tennessee Medical Association is a great association I've been part of for decades, and I've served in various offices and capacities there, from member of various committees to legislative stuff and all that. I've been part of the House of Delegates for years as well. But over the past couple of years, I've backed off just because of, I needed to sort of recover from the devastation of the few years there. But this year, there are some people on the board and some members who have drafted a resolution to be presented in the House of Delegates here in a couple of weeks
Hmm.
that basically removes all personhood characteristics from babies, from
Hmm.
fetuses. They say, from a fetus, embryo, or fertilized egg, they should not be considered a person with the same rights and legal protections as born individuals. So basically, they're trying to draft something as radical as the New York State Legislature did 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And they're basically saying a baby in its mother's womb should have no human rights. They should not be considered a human until after they are birthed and delivered. Again, we're getting back to the magical vagina. The magical vagina confers life, but before that, that child should not be considered
Yeah.
human life.
Yeah.
And the scary thing is that there is a great deal of support for it. I'm under the understanding that full third of the board of the TMA
Hmm.
actually is in support of this. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be there. I'm scheduled to be in the ER out of town, so
Yeah.
I wish I could be there to speak to it. So,
My doctor in Memphis, last time I saw him, just let me know that he was pulling out of all kinds of medical associations because he just didn't see the benefit to them. They were woke, anti-life. He was having ethics problems with them. Well-known doctor in the Memphis area. Are institutions like this failing because they're driving conservative and Christian doctors out of them who have genuine problems with what they're doing?
definitely, the Tennessee Medical Association is still a very strong organization
Hmm.
with very solid conservative values, but we're being infiltrated by those who are not like
Well,
us.
Omar, that's
Um,
clear. It says pregnant person, the pregnant patient. That is
mhm.
leftist lingo. I'm not a, great scholar of legalese, but in one pass, I instantly read this and said, this sounds woke.
Yeah, and it is. However, national medical organizations like the AMA, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, like the American Academy of Family Physicians, American College of OBGYN, they're toast. They're gone. Those are leftist organizations. I'm still a member because they do provide some very good support systems for us professionally. Plus, I don't want all of us who have a voice to just abandon ship and jump overboard.
Right.
I want to be able to have some effect,
Right.
but they're all leaning left.
Let's move on just to some lexical issues, creating this lexicon that we talked about needing. The foundational issue for us as Christians, I think, is really, when does life begin? Is there a difference, Dr. Hamada, between fertilization and conception?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you're pointing out these language issues because that's exactly the point where the leftists, and I don't know what else to call them, attack is they change the meaning of words, whether it's medical abortion, whether it's termination of pregnancy, whether it's fetus and baby. They move the goalposts and they
Yes.
change the meanings of words or the way they're used or understood so that they can accomplish what they want. They're looking towards agenda rather than accuracy.
So fertilization and conception are essentially the same thing. So life begins at fertilization. There's a later stage, implantation. Life begins at
Mhm.
fertilization. Would you say that?
Yes, definitely. So there are some minor differences, for example, as I'm thinking through it. You can fertilize an ovum in a petri dish, right? That's what IVF is. So we're
Mhm.
getting fertilization without conception there. Conception is when a woman becomes pregnant. And when a woman becomes pregnant is the precise time of fertilization in her body. But if it's fertilized outside, technically that's not conception,
But we
right?
do have a life at that point.
We sure do.
Okay.
Yep, a life has been created. DNA has been combined. There's a flash of light, and that baby is a live human.
Made in the image of God.
That's right. And
Yep.
total image bearer of Christ there. So as we deal with the terminology here and the timeline of fertilization, the term they want to throw in here in some of the legislation that we saw in Tennessee was contraception. So is contraception as we know it in a Christian standpoint, does it prevent or is it a post fertilization operation?
Technically, contraception prevents pregnancy. When I was in residency, I had a good friend who was Catholic and staunchly so, and we would go back and forth debating a lot of these things. And his point was that when the act of sex was removed from the responsibility of sex, humankind and society started to crumble because God created sex as a beautiful gift between a man and wife with the result of procreation and populating the earth, which was the command in Genesis. he gave Adam and Eve,
Right.
be fruitful and multiply. And when we disarticulated those two things, we began to have significant problems. And, however we feel about it, but contraception is the active intervention to prevent pregnancy from an act of sexual intercourse between a man and a woman.
So if we talk about something that happens post fertilization, we are no longer talking about contraception, correct?
Correct.
So I think this is something that our listeners need to hear us state clearly. If so many of these so-called experts are saying that contraception and all forms of contraception have to be acceptable, we need people to pay very close attention to that, because abortifacients, chemical abortifacients, and emergency contraception are all things that take place post fertilization.
Mm-hmm.
And we have laws now that are opening this window for us. Dr. Hamada, please tell me that there has to be something that we can do to fix that, because this sounds backwards.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And you're totally right. After conception occurs, it's no longer a contraceptive, it's an abortifacient, whatever form we're using or intervening. And I would hope that there are ways to prevent that. I'm not a legislator. I understand that there are intentions to reverse the effects of this House Bill 533 in the next session. I'm not sure how they're meaning to go about that, but I hope that they can.
I'm very upset about this whole thing, because I feel like we open a Pandora's box for just any sort of term that can now sit in and be called a contraception, because the law itself said all forms of contraception have to be allowed. And I think that is a huge, huge red flag for us.
It is. And I wish that somebody had called me and asked me to review this. Some people have, like Gino Bilso calls me often and, asks for help with some medical language.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they'd done that on this, because I'm reading here, it says, like you're saying, contraception means an action taken to prevent pregnancy. No, it doesn't. Contraception is an action taken to prevent fertilization or conception. But after that, any action taken to prevent pregnancy is an abortifacient. Yep.
So it's our understanding then that HB 533, with no exaggeration, legalized abortion again in Tennessee.
Or opened the door to it, yes.
Okay.
And that's exactly where they come down, as they define it differently. They would say, well, an abortion is terminating a pregnancy that's already implanted. So it's just like life. Where do you draw the line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where is that line drawn?
And again, we're saying that life begins at fertilization.
Correct.
Okay. We have some adjacent issues to this. We talk about the role of science. We're told to follow the science. That was the very annoying, it feels almost Faucian to say that. And it's sad that so many in my generation and younger, I think, kind of roll our eyes when we hear follow the science now, because science is a gift to us from God. Embryology textbooks are clear. You were clear. Life begins at fertilization. If that's true, what does that look like in relation to IVF?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question. And here's why we get confused sometimes. We overall want good for people. We want those who are struggling and suffering to not be struggling and suffering. We want to be able to provide some balm for their souls. We want people to experience the joys of life. So sometimes it gets difficult, because then that impacts our policies, whether it's our theology or our policies. So when it comes to IVF, I'm just going to be very straight down the line scientific here, and then we can talk about, the practical application of it. Lives are being created when that sperm and egg are joined. And it used to be that there would be harvesting of many ova or female eggs, and they would all be fertilized, and then they would be looked at under a microscope, and those that were the healthiest would be reimplanted. And they would reimplant multiple, 4, 5, 6, depending on the patient. And then see which ones take, and then do a fetal reduction, which would basically be an abortion of those that looked the weakest and weren't growing the best, and come out with 1 or 2 that they would take to term. And that was always a moral tragedy that was very difficult, right? And that's pretty clear. But then where it gets more difficult, I think, is those fertilized embryos that are growing and then are frozen. What becomes of them? They're in cryopreservation. Those are human lives that have been basically preserved. So, do we believe those have souls? Do we believe they're persons? Do we believe that they are genetically independent persons? Yes. If we're going to
Right.
be scientifically and morally consistent, the answer is yes. So,
Right.
what do we do with those when it comes to men and women who are infertile, seeking to have children and fertility? There are many answers. I think, making sure that they are all implanted and that they all have a chance to live, whether it's through adoption or, we only fertilize those eggs that we intend on reimplanting. But yeah, it's a difficult situation because now there are millions of little babies, of little humans frozen all over the United States.
It is
And what's going to
literally
become of them?
millions.
Literally millions.
Wow. Is there even any accurate count?
I'm sure there is, and somebody probably knows the number. I'd say in the low millions. I mean, we have 350 million people. Let's say half are women, and half of those are reproductive age potentially.
Mhm.
So in 75, let's say 70 million. It's probably a higher number, but I'm going on very
Sure.
conservative numbers. 10% of those are probably infertile, and I don't know how many of those would seek IVF. And with each of those, multiple ova are harvested and fertilized. So yeah, I'd say, low millions.
Wow.
Wow.
It's heartbreaking. And, it's instantly easy for us to kick back and say, well, you bunch of pirates in the medical industry, you're doing this for profit, and I don't want to be somebody who comes out and says that. But Dr. Hamada, you are the expert here. Are there changes and reforms? Are there other ways around the world that this is done better?
Well, there have been changes, and I think we are getting better at it. And I say we, just as a medical community. Fewer fertilized eggs are being implanted in uteri. So let's say they implant three and they expect one or two to take. So fetal reductions has significantly reduced, or abortions essentially is what it is, has significantly reduced in REI situations, or reproductive endocrinology.
Mhm.
But what about all those embryos that are frozen? That number hasn't really gone down. I mean, I think they still harvest, whatever they can. So I don't know that there's anything on the table right now that is looking to improve that situation for those kids. Hopefully, these next 4 years we'll see some of that, but it's not something that slaps people in the face a whole lot. Most people don't experience it. Most people don't see it. So we tend to ignore it or just don't know it's there.
We saw this come to public light in a way that was very moving, just the overall zeitgeist in Alabama several years ago, with that wrongful death claim against a clinic that suffered a failure that had frozen embryos stored. And then the state legislature, of course, took and debated it. And that's really, unfortunately, the kind of talk we find ourselves needing to have here in Tennessee. But what terms have we not covered that we need to have in our lexicon?
Well, one came to me today. Actually, I had a friend who sent me this that we have briefly discussed before the call, with this amendment to Senate Bill 1004 and House Bill 990, where they are defining terms and they are way off base. They're defining inevitable abortion, and there's no real medical terminology that says that. But what they mean, I think, is a threatened abortion that's, more determined that it's going to fail. They're basically saying anytime there's cervical dilatation, then we need to just give up and say that's inevitable abortion. One, that's not true, but also defines it as just dilation of the cervix. And two, that's not true. So they're trying to redefine terms. And this was Gardenhire who did this. They're redefining terms that are inaccurate, that are basically evil and wrong and misappropriated. And they are being intentional about it. They're looking for ways, trying to let foxes back in the henhouse. And the problem is the people who are voting on these things, many of them truthfully don't understand the language. And I'm not going to attribute, evil intent to every legislator that votes on these, because maybe they don't really fully understand what it means. It sounds good. They're having doctors come in and testify for it, in support of it, and they believe them.
Mhm.
And then the governor signs it because, he's also not a physician, and they're not hearing from the
Yeah.
right people.
I've watched a lot of testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I've sat in on some committee hearings in person, specifically the summer study in 2019. If you've been on the Senate Judiciary Committee any amount of time like Senator Gardenhire has, I have a hard time thinking that you have a gross misunderstanding of a lot of these terms. I mean, we're not making this lexicon for Senator Gardenhire. We're making this lexicon for the average Tennessean. Do you think he has the basis to be confused
Yeah.
on some of these?
No doubt. I think he's being intentional here. I think he knows exactly what he's doing here. But, it gets put, in front of committee, and maybe they have a little bit more knowledge. But then when it gets taken to the full Senate or the full House, I don't think everybody there understands every word. And I don't think they read every word of every bill.
But they're very sophisticated at asking good questions when they want to be.
Yeah, they can. Yep, agreed.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hamada. We're out of time. Folks, this has been a great conversation with Dr. Hamada. If you want to hear more on this or other topics from a Christian worldview, head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to over 5 years of past shows. You can listen to a wide range of guests sharing their wisdom about current events that affect Tennessee and the entire nation. So, folks, make sure to tune in. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, until next week, our favorite phrase from the book of Exodus, the Lord shall reign forever and ever.